2023 for May of 2023. This is going to be a retro anime. It's going to be based on series and based on films. The reason why this is, I haven't done one of these in like years. So there are going to be people who know these animes, and then there are going to be people who don't know these animes. I've never seen them before. And there are going to be people who critique animes and those who don't critique animes. Why these animes were chosen? Because they serve a greater purpose other than just pieces of art that you look at, you listen to, and you use in your daily lives. They are representations of education within films, of how to do things, or how to stay away from things, or how to interact with things, how to interact with people, how to identify and stay away from things that are harm, and how to help the world around you at the same time, how to help those closest to you, or how to stay away from those who are toxic to you. All of these films are educational in some ways, and those that aren't educational are simply those based on emotional journey, and those that have an art form in entity of themselves that are simply good content and are well done content, and are done sometimes better than those who have content simply to educate on people on how to do things. The overall journey of any type of film or any type of story or any type of content or anything for that matter is to make sure that your beginning, your middle, and your end are secure, and the products in between in those increments, at the 25, 35, 45 halfway point, past the halfway point, the cool down effect before the end, the climax, all these things have to be set. The same way you would make a bike, the same way you would make a cake, the same way you would do anything in life. The same way you wake up, you put on your clothes, you go to work, you follow the same routine, and you come back, you do it again the next day because you know it works and it's effective. The same way you look at content and what you're watching and see if what you're seeing is effective, enjoyable, and it's a sense of either relief, a sense of either relaxation, a sense of either representation, or it's a sense of education. So if it hits all three crescendos, then it's good. So for the first of these is Spirited Away. Now this is my first 5-star anime, and it represents, I would say, 75% of what I just said. So before I get into this, I'm Mackie. I do anime and manga and gaming, and every now and again I do these videos rather than play gaming. And I do gaming simply to do the same thing I do in these manga videos. I specifically identify them to see they are good products, good things worth reading, and I simply like to share with other people so they could check it out for themselves. Now, if they don't find something interesting within the list is not to say that every one of them are for you, but majority of them are going to be for you. That's why it's called the balancing act, a balancing effect, or at a buffet table. You pick whatever you want from the list that's most effective for you and helpful for you and enjoyable for you, or for someone else that's important to you, or simply just to give them an idea of how to do things in life. So, that said, this first one is called Spirited Away by Miyazaki. And I'm starting it off straight. I won't get into anything other than some synopsis or an idea within the synopsis. So it starts with a girl and her family moves to a town. Not sure if the road leads directly to the house, but the name of the girl in this story is Chihori, and her father decides to take a shortcut. So when he decides to take the shortcut, he looks at this road, decides to take a shortcut. A typical father to do, or a typical person who, there's a know-it-all, figure there's a way to get through anything, decides to take a shortcut. Um, and just to address the obvious, I will start from Miyazaki. How Miyazaki plays the parents kind of irresponsible when it comes to nature, as well when it comes to adulthood, with regards to spending, savings, with regards to indulgence and self-indulgence, as most adults have become with regards to themselves of who they were, who they're going to be, and who they end up being. Um, what Miyazaki didn't do is towards the end is give some type of resolution towards the parents. So as 5 stars as his stories are, there are simple things that Miyazaki is not good at. Sometimes closing out something is not something he's perfect at. Even though it seems like a story closed out perfectly, but tying up loose ends is something Miyazaki is not really that good at. So that said, I'm moving forward. After entering a strange area, and that's what happened right here. They get out. The parents get out the car and walk to the strange area within the forest. See this door. Come up to this like little passageway or this little tunnel within the door. The daughter doesn't feel comfortable about this area. There's something about it that makes her feel uncomfortable. I don't know. It's something that kids just feel eerie about certain things, or they feel the energy about certain things. It's a, I guess it's a tropey thing to believe that kids kind of have a sixth sense feeling. When I was young, that was simply something based on my idea and my belief of what it is around me that I'm feeling or what I'm sensing. And that simply has to do with a development thing within a child's mind. Their emotions, their mind, their believability, their sight, the sounds and everything is racing at a mile a minute. So sometimes it was something will come across as is there that you believe a child can see or you as a child are seeing, but sometimes it's the most obvious thing that's right in front of you. It could simply be a tree, but then it looks like a donkey or something. Or there could simply not be anything in the shadows, and it could just be an image of something you create in your mind. But then sometimes there could be something in the shadow, but it's not typically what you would think. Um, Moving on from that, the next scene shows the parents going up a slight hill. Um, with regards to the tunnel and this hill this is kind of like a place in Japan, a modern place in Japan, but it kind of ties to like a foundation between the past and the present. This hill represents a way station, um, a crossing over the bridge or crossing over planes of one reality to the next. Whereas in some stories it's a bridge, where in other stories it's a gateway, where in other stories it's the river Styx. In this story is like a transcending hill that goes from one location to the next. So after that, Chihori explores a location. Um, at parents as well, they explore this location. They find some food at the table at this location. They start chowing down on the food at this location without even asking any question whether there are people at the location or whether there's anything going on at the location or where are all the actual customers or where are all the residents and everything. They just started to indulge in the food. It's also at this point that when I was watching this film so many years ago, as well as I recapped it for this video, is that the parents could have been um, even before even before they got into this little town area. Um, the moment they entered that tunnel, they were duped under some type of spell or trance, um, a thing that allows their type of gluttony or their type of will to possess things to be enhanced. Their nature, their indulgent nature, was accelerated to a point that it made them feel that they were being pulled towards great things, towards a sense of gold or something at the end of a rainbow because of their nature of wanting to have things and have enough of things and to have better of things. They saw this hike and this nature as another way to attain another thing. So that's one of the things that was expressed within this anime. So they didn't question that there was no one there as they were chowing down the food. Eventually, it comes to a point that they chow down so much that they started to turn into pigs. The little girl doesn't know what's going on, and the parents never question how their bodies start to look and how everything was happening to them because by the time they started to eat the food which wasn't meant for human beings was meant for people of the spirit world. They're eating spirit food. Um, it dulls their minds to even questioning what's happening to them in physical forms, because they're either their brains are being rotten, or their consciousness have been replaced, or their emotions of who they were, or the memories of who they were, has been dulled down. So that's what happened to them. And then moving forward from that, eventually, Chihori realized that her parents have become pigs, decided to run for it, assuming that her parents have been replaced by something else, or someone is duping her, or fooling her, or something like that. So she runs away, and eventually she comes across a group of people, a multiple group of people, and they resemble spirits, but not just them, other things as well. A town that suddenly seems to be abandoned, and devoid of any type of life starts to have life in it. People, but these aren't normal looking people. They'll all look like monsters or spirit type of creatures, basically Japanese mythological characters. And some of them mythological, and some of them simply made up by Miyazaki himself. Other than that, she then runs away and then finds this guy named Haku. And Haku is basically a normal human boy, um, who you would assume when you first see him, he's trapped in this location, and he's like forced to be in this location for his survival, kind of like an alien situation. He's surrounded by aliens and different creatures, and he have to adapt to the location in order to survive. Um, this is not the case moving forward. But as the story goes, Haku then tells her, listen, if you want to survive in this spirit world, or in this monster world, or this realm that they're in, you have to find a guy named Komogi, ask him for work, and then proceed forward to work for him. And in time, he will give you a ticket to take a train that leads to the hill that you were at, where you could walk to that hill and then walk back over that hill, and then get towards where you originally were, where your parents were, with your parents. So he have it all planned out, or he already know about this, because he's probably done this for other people as well who've come to this very strange place. So that said, Chiori goes to Komogi, a man that looks like a spider and who's working on something that looks like a steampunk windmill, or a Geiger counter, or whatever it is that he's working on. He's just spinning things, um, like a furnace to an old train that's moving, that you use coals for, something like that. And what he does is, eventually he tells her, I don't need any more helpers. You could go get work from Obaba. And Obaba is the witch of um, this world. You could basically think of her as a wicked witch of this world, something like in The Wizard of Oz. And just to point that out, this Spirited Away is very much like The Wizard of Oz. But Spirited Away is also very much like Star Wars, and Spirited Away is also very much like Alice in Wonderland. It feels like all three of these things mixed into one. You would understand what I'm saying when I say Alice in Wonderland, The Wicked Witch, and of course Star Wars. Um, but I think it was more like Wicked Witch, and Alice in Wonderland, more like Oz and Alice in Wonderland than like Star Wars. Though it have a lot of Star Wars hints applied to it. So moving forward from that, the story then goes to the girl going to Obaba, and Obaba is this witch, obviously, giant hair, giant head witch, and she also tells her, "I don't have any work for little kids. Um, get the hell out of here." Blah blah blah. But eventually, she lets the girl work for her, because in the past she made an agreement that anyone who comes to her for help and ask for work from her, they must work for her. And it was a binding life contract type of thing. So she cannot refuse them work, even though she wants to refuse them work. If they ask for it, they have to do it. I'm assuming that this life contract agreement has to do something that's solely attached to her, that which she made, and if she broke that promise, something severe might happen. The anime never uh, shows that or emphasize that, but that's not really important within the anime. The next scene shows another customer within the location of this hut or this nice little bathhouse, because it is a bathhouse. And since the majority of the story happens in the bathhouse, and this customer is called No Face. And what No Face is a very strange character. He represents another type of human desire and needs. You could say the want for acceptance, or the want for fulfillment, or the want for justification, or simply to show the world that this is the behavior of those who splurge and behave unruly, are willing to feed others their personal desires by just giving them what they want. And he basically has the power to create gold or to create anything by simply seeing it or replicating it or just developing it from his body. And in the spirit world, he gives these things to these various different spirit type of people. He gives it to his owner here, he gives it to various different people, and eventually he consumes them for consuming it. And so he's a type of defined human desire that Miyazaki is trying to show to the general audience, that these things will only make you become more of a glutton or more of an aggressive tyrant type person. So he's kind of an antagonist in the story, but not really. The true antagonist of the story is Yubaba. He's simply a representation of a type of desire that the story needs to tell with regards to what the story is basically is. Um, the spirit realm and things related to one's spirit. That it could be toxic, that it could be clean, that it could be corrupted, so on and so forth. Um, the word spirit away is simply not just because this is like a spirit world. It has multiple meanings, or some meanings, not completely multiple, but some meanings. So moving on from that, eventually Chihori tries to rescue um, Haku once it's discovered that Yubaba has a sister, and Yubaba's sister is a twin sister. And Yubaba doesn't like her twin sister and wants to steal all of her twin sister's property so she could be the number one witch. So it's very, like I said, it's an Oz thing. Two witches, um, sisters, and so they're both alike in appearance and similar in powers. But one is trying to, updo the other. So in trying to steal from Obaba's sister, Haku gets damaged and is possibly going to die. So in order for Chihori to try to save Haku, she goes to Yubaba to try to save her. Blah blah blah. Yubaba doesn't want to get involved, but Chihori decides that she's going to take actions into her own hand in order to save Haku. She eventually does it, and in the process, she remembers who Haku was, and by remember who Haku was, she allows him to also remember who he was. So he remembers that his name has a meaning, that he was once a spirit of under a bridge, or a spirit that died under a bridge, or the representation name for the spirit of under of a bridge. So in Japanese culture, they called the Haku kind of the spirit that lingers under, in the mythology of their culture. A spirit that lingers under a bridge is kind of a way to keep people away, or way to keep people warning from doing things that they shouldn't. But in this film, he's a physical representation of what that is in the form of a boy and also in the form of a dragon. His original form is actually a dragon. But he takes on the form of a boy in order to communicate with Chihori, and also in order to, I guess, to feel more like he's more than just um, a type of creature, that he's human in both his emotions as well as his needs. So moving on from that, but so once Chihori remembers who Haku was, and Haku remember who he was, Chihiro then goes to Yubaba in order to, and they both agree, Chihori and Haku, that it's time for Chihori to leave because Chihori returned um, Yubaba's son to her, and without damage, and agreement was if Chihori was able to return the child back to Yubaba, all would be forgiven, or at least that's what they were assuming. But Yubaba wasn't done with that at all. Yubaba wanted to test Chihori because, like all forms of the need to possess things, um, this anime is a representation of possession as well as indulgence. So Yubaba also tries to still keep Chihori there within the spirit world by testing her by saying which one of your parents that are turned into pigs is your parents. She eventually, by looking at the pigs that are in front of her, she realized that none of the pigs that are in front of her actually look exactly like pigs. There's something off about them, every single one of them. So even though she might not be able to identify her parents look exactly, she know that they don't exactly look like pigs, like the pigs that she saw in the pen. There was something off about all of them, and that's one of the fallings or faults of Yubaba. Even though she's very powerful, very powerful, and she can create things, she cannot replicate what is actually real in front of her. She can only create an illusion of what's real in front of her. Just like a person could tell the difference between a mirror image of themselves or actually physical person that's right in front of them. But that also depends on the type of story. So the story could have gone either one way or the other, depending on where the storyteller was trying to tell the story. Either way, it end up going the way Chihori wants to. Everyone cheers about it. Everyone from the beginning of the story that she met um, to everyone that she met later in the middle of the story. So everyone says goodbye to her. She goes back home, now free of Yubaba's whole contract. She has a ticket, so she's about to get on that train, leading towards that station, which lets her get off at the hill. And even the giant baby from Yubaba says goodbye to her. Yes, the baby in the show is a giant baby, which is a representation of people who act like giant babies are irresponsible in their behaviors and their wants and needs. They always want, so they're all big babies, and the face of the baby is very much like adults who have way too much, and are big babies, are unwilling to accept what is and move on. Sometimes things don't work out for you, you move on. If it's not for you, you move on. You just don't stay there and indulge, or you don't stay there and just makes it, you know, bleed on you or make it become toxic on you. So that said, moving on, you get to the next section in the story, and or should I say the last section in the story, the last 5 minutes of the story. She crosses over the hill where her parents originally came over with her, and after getting off the train, and she finds her way back to the original place that she was before with her parents, and she sees her parents there at the entrance, where originally exit out of to cross over the hill. So the hill itself represents the hill as well represents not just a way station between spirit world and real world. It's a representation as well as the difference between um, going over things and or keeping things together, like acceptance with what you have, or going over something and accepting something else that you don't need or you don't want or you should have, but you or you shouldn't have, but you want to have. Basically, the hill is a form of what is going on in the show as well. So the hill has its own type of character as well. It's not just something that transitioned from one to another. It's also a representation of um, changing of one's own desires into one's own more desires, or uncommon desires, or toxic desires. The same for the parents when they first entered the story. They were in a car, and they were the typical type of parents, normal and everything. But as soon as they get to this location, and as soon as they go through the tunnel, they started to, or even before they went to the tunnel, as soon as they went into the woods, they started to act strange. But as soon as they got to the tunnel, they started to really act strange, as if they were hypnotized, or their desires were being repelled to, or compelled to go into the tunnel. So the tunnel and the hill are kind of characters themselves. Um, to make it, a long story short. That said, the last scene shows her exiting the tunnel with her parents. Her parents saying, "Well, is this a joke? Like, we have a lot of leaves on the car. There's dirt inside of the car on the seats. Like, someone must have been pulling a prank on us because we just left for about a couple of minutes ago, and now it looks like, it's been here for like years and stuff." The wife said that's very strange. Chihori not paying attention to them because she knows exactly that, she actually saved them from dying or being eaten. Um, Looks back at the tunnel, and in that looking back state is also another factor in the story that Miyazaki is trying to show us. That was it all real, or was it not real? Now, in Chihori's mind, it's 100% real, and in the viewer's mind, it was 100% real because they were seeing it. But when she looks back in a perplexed state, as if she herself is not sure if any of this happened. Like, how could a little girl rescue her parents from spirit monsters? Is any of that real? But she knows that this did happen, and she knows that she did survive the situation. And even if she feels that a sense of regret, or a sense of longing for the place, or a sense of she's going to miss Haku, she's going to miss her friend, miss the person she cares more about, which is Haku. Leaving Haku is hard and everything. She also knows that what's most valuable to her is what's right in front of her as well. As much as her parents does not as much as her parents don't really deserve the type of love she has for them as they have for her, which they don't have a lot for her, for their daughter's safety whatsoever at all, because they're both their responsible parents. She also knows that that's not her reality. She's not a spirit. Um, that's not her cup of tea, even if she was a spirit. And she's not really unhappy about not going back. She's only unhappy that Haku has to stay there, or certain people that she's befriended have to stay in that place under Obaba's care, or other locations within that place under other people's care. So when she looks at that location, and then she turns away at this scene, she looks at this scene, but then she turns away at this scene. It's a kind of a turning of one's head, of letting go of past and proceeding forward to the future. So that's another thing within the story that was present. Um, Accepting that you are now not the same person you used to be. You're willing to go forward in life, to be someone much stronger based on what you've learned and what you've experienced. So when her parents in this last scene in the vehicle tell her, like, okay, are you going to be okay, Chihori? Are you feeling fine? She says, yes, I think I'll be just fine. That's what she says. She says, I'll be just fine. Not no specific words, but I'm saying what she's saying. She said, basically telling them, I'm going to be just fine. And that's her telling the audience, not only she's going to be just fine, she's going to be just fine with them when she grows up, without her parents when she grows up, or even with her parents as she's growing up, seeing the type of person, people they are, and seeing what she's learned and what she's gained and what she's accomplished in just a short amount of time, which is a very long time, but for the amount of time that the parents and her went into the tunnel and came out of the tunnel with the short span of the film, it seems like a very short time, but it probably was years she was in there. But she's learned so much being in that place. But who knows? Maybe it could have just been months or just a couple of days. But she still learned a lot within that period that she could not have learned from her parents. And like I said, as much as this is a 5-star story, Miyazaki sometimes have a lot of things that are unresolved. A lot of individuals are unresolved. So as great as this story of Spirited Away is, it's not a perfect story because any story that you leave unresolved for certain things cannot make your story perfect. So that's why I have it at 5 stars, but it's not like a perfect 5-star movie. It's a 5-star movie with flaws. That said, moving on to the next story, and if anyone sees or knows this text, they will know what this anime is. 1988.76 Tokyo. So it's June the 16th, 1988, the summer of 1988 in Tokyo. And this is the story of Akira. And this is my second favorite movie of all times and would have been my first if it wasn't for the fact that the storyteller, the director of this film, and of the illustrator of the manga, um, is not a Miyazaki type. He's not trying to better the world in the sense of conservation or Greenpeace or um, agriculture or bring awareness onto how to be a better person through his films. What this director is doing is something of an awareness to the world that's corrupt around you and how you shouldn't be like the world that's corrupt around you. This is not an averting of a behavior from a thing and how to better oneself. This is simply showing of what that thing is. Now, what you choose to do based on what the director is saying with certain actions in the film, um, within your daily lives or within politics or within friends, that's completely up to you. But more than anything, this is, you could make a thesis of this video far greater than you could make a thesis of Spirited Away. Um, Far more, because in this film, there's far more subject matters, there are far more tense topic, there's far more detailed topic, there's far more economic and social topic, and there's far more political and militaristic topics in this film. So this film, if it wasn't for its gross nature of violence and not meant for children, this would be the number one. The simple fact that Miyazaki is number one is he's trying to educate you on how to be a better person, and also his film are for more of a general audience. Whereas this film is simply trying to educate you, period, and doesn't care if you're a kid or not. It's not willing to hold your hands. So it is more like for a mature audience, but it's an educational film no matter how you cut it. And it's done far better with regards to transition than Miyazaki's film ever was. And it doesn't drag either, like sometimes Miyazaki films does. So from that saying, we see a scene of an explosion in Tokyo. Tokyo 1988 explosion. And then moving on from there, um, you see a little screen, and there are multiple different scenes that are popped up within the film. But I decided to choose this scene because this is the first scene of many scenes or many channels that are within a bar. And the story, the final stage for the visual masterpiece, which I call this story, is a very horrific one and has some suggestive language and themes, but how everything starts from beginning and moves towards the end is perfectly balanced and perfectly synchronized. So let's see. We then introduced to Kaneda and his biker buddy. Kaneda is the main protagonist of this story. Um, Pretty much a badass kid and a bad kid. He's not really a good guy. He's not really the antagonist of the story, and he's not really the savior either. He's just an average Joe. And each scene set up within Akira is setting the stage for greater things to happen. Also, each scene in Akira is visually stunning, even for a hand drawn piece of artwork. Everything within Akira was hand drawn. And if I'm not mistaken, Akira was the first cell anime to reach big budget screens in film cinema in Japan. So it was the first actually cinematic experience cell anime um, experiment, or if not, you don't want to call it experiment, cell anime product. So Akira was not only as a story ahead of its time, but in technology, it was also ahead of its time. So we then come to a scene where we see our secondary protagonist, if you want to call him. His name is Tetsuo. And what he's doing right here, he's chasing another gang member because Tetsuo and Kaneda are in a gang. And there are rival gang factions within this 1988 alternate type of world, Tokyo. Um, but then again, that was the Tokyo of June, and this could be the Tokyo. I'm not exactly sure. They never stated when was the actually progressing years that followed. Could have been 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It was just the future that followed after the destruction of Tokyo in 1988. So for all I know, if I'm mistaken, I'm mistaken. But for all I know, this could be anywhere from 5 years to 10 years into the future, past those events, or simply like 3 years or 2 years. But I don't believe it will be 3 years or 2 years because to repair and restore buildings back into their regular condition, even buildings that look messed up, to replace and to reconstruct, like baseball stadiums or various different business or even residential areas, that would take years. It would take like a lot. Like if that nuke went off and destroyed like a city, it would take more than a decade. I would say it's probably more than 10 years since that original, like minimum, probably more than 5 years, but I would say also minimum, probably more than 10 years as well. So whatever happened in 1988, boom, that happened. And we're now into the future. For all I know, this could be the 2020 of that future of the 88, or for all I know, it could be 2050. But regardless of what's going on, this is the future, the cyberpunk future. And the bikes are very cyberpunk and the bikes are very futuristic. So I'm not going to, identify a specific year. So moving on from that, we then go to a scene where Tetsuo is riding the bike. And then after Tetsuo rode the bike, you see various different military people. And then you see various different politicians. And then you see a situation with someone getting shot. Now, those scenes are from later on within the show, but those are just examples of things possibly happening all at the same time. So the show never actually tells you that these things are happening all at the same time. It put it more like they're progressively happen, but they could have all been happening at the same time. So what's happening now, progressing directly after the boy, directly after the fight with the biker gangs, directly after Kaneda is fighting other biker people, directly after the clown hit one of the Canadian people and knock him off the bike, off his bike, doing a headbutt, and directly after Kaneda or Tetsuo did his own chasing scene, we get to the point of the kid. Just to point out one thing, though, I'm going to point out that it's been years since I've seen this, probably more than a decade, probably more than 2 decades since I've actually watched this show from beginning to end. During my recap of this movie, um, I did not know that this clown leader, the leader of the clowns, his tattoo or his paint on his head was upside down. I always thought it was painted on his head and it looked like something, but I never realized this whole time that it was upside down because I only saw this when I was a teenager, and I guess I might have resaw it when I was in my early 20s, but I saw it like about 2 or 3 times most. But I never really dug into the whole deep grooves of what Akira was with regards to characters that weren't the main character. So if you look onto the character of every single character, even minor character or characters that aren't important, they have things about them that were small little trinkets of Easter eggs or goodness or things that you would expect them to have to kind of give it a type of fluff or a type of fun feeling towards it. For instance, his upside down smiley face is also mixed in with his hair. So if you were to flip his face upside down and you were to look at his entire face upside down, his face upside down also looked like a face itself. So it looked like a face smiling with a guy with a goatee, a small goatee on top of his head. So a reverse head with a goatee at the bottom. So his hair on top of his head is like a goatee if you were to reverse his head. It's very strange, but I never realized that. I never realized the face. I never realized the hair kind of looked like a goatee at the bottom of that. The top of his circle of his head looks like a chin if you reverse his head. So I never noticed that, but that's a little detail that was added into the film simply as a fun thing. And sometimes you can miss those things. Sometimes you can miss a lot of things. So back on point, the kid has escaped a facility. Man from the facility helped him to escape. Whether he works in the facility or not was never explained. It's assumed that he's part of a faction or militia or a terrorist group that kidnapped the kid and want to give the kid to other terrorist group. It's assumed that, or it's assumed that he was someone who decided to abandon his principles or those who he worked for and took the kid. Um, this kid, however, is not a normal kid. Obviously, based on the image of what you're seeing, he looks very prony. He looks like an old man and everything. This man got shot and they're escaping. The kid eventually loses his hat on the road after the man got shot up. Well, I think he got shot up and the kid lost his hat. And then the kid finds himself on the highway and Tetsuo's vehicle end up running into the kid. And then we'll move on from that into the further into the story. We find ourselves that Tetsuo, well, not Tetsuo, Kaneda and the other gang members are being interrogated by the police after they're captured by the military. And Tetsuo himself has been claimed by the military after his interaction with the kid because anyone who interacts with one of these children is of special interest. Now, the story never tells you this, but it's assumed that they took him simply because he got injured and they want to care for him. But that's not the case. Um, it's far deeper than that. So, as the story is progressing, the next crescendo of the story that excels in story is the policing. So, you get a nice little intro, a gang chase scene, but then the story decides to bring it back down, to earth, to make things feel more realistic by the policing. So they're being interrogated, being asked questions, so on and so forth. The police starts to tell them that he's not an old man, he's of a certain age. And then that scene ends, and then you find yourself, the film goes towards where Tetsuo has been experimented on, or at least been scanned for his injuries. If the kid didn't do anything to him, it's then discovered that Tetsuo has influences from the kid's power, and they must keep him within the facility. However, he managed to escape the facility, ran away, went to see his girlfriend, and then Canada found him with the girl and a group of clowns who attacked him. However, he has like this spasm breakdown and starts seeing things. The doctors from the facility eventually got there, or the medics or paramedics got there and started to check his eyes, check his pulse and everything, and they gave him a shot. Canada, at the same time, as well as Canada's gang friends, don't know what the hell is going on, but they tried to interrupt what was going on with the various different doctors who were trying to take care of Tetsuo. Canada gets thrown to the side by a guy. Um, it's called, I guess the English dub is call him the funeral director. Just, Canada's little whip quip thing of insulting the guy because he looks like he just came from a funeral. Um, Also, you go to the next scene, you see a group of people sitting on a chair, a guy and a girl making out and stuff, very loosely, and a guy walking by with a cane. This is a politician, and this is where the next phase in the story escalates. So the beginning of the story is basically very fast, very furious, but then it dies down in order to bring you back into the story. But then slowly, as it brought you back into the story, and you're waiting for it to escalate again, it then escalates again. But it escalates in a direction not action oriented, but it escalates in a direction of political intrigue and mystery of what the hell Akira is and what the hell is going on within the government. And you get to find out certain things that's going on in the government from this politician's point of view. Apparently, he was either bankrolling the terrorists or he was in league with the terrorists. But he meets one of them, one of the terrorist leaders or uh, faction separatist leaders who wants to actually make Japan better, which is another strange thing. The terrorists in this story aren't really terrorists. They're simply trying to make the people of the city aware of the corruption of the government, and they're simply trying to make um, the corruption of the government pay for what they're doing. At the same time, trying to figure out a way to get certain funds from certain people who are willing to support their cause in order to make things better. So these terrorist group aren't actually like terrorist group. They're more like people who are trying to identify the government for its shitty and messed up ways, but at the same time trying to see how they could replace such members that are within the government by doing certain extreme measures in order to either get funds that they need or to either bring self-awareness to what's happening. They're not trying to have a lot of people run towards their cause. They're simply trying to get certain things in order to, I guess, show to the world, to a news broadcast station, or to any type of media that this is the type of shady corruption that's going on within the government. But at the same time, they're doing things for this politician who's not necessarily 100% care about their revolution or what they're trying to do. So it's two sides of the fence. Him, the politician, trying to help this group of radical extremists who are trying to make the country a better place. But they're doing it in kind of a wrong way, but it's the only way they know of at the same moment, because there's no other way to force um, like people who are unwilling to listen, who are stuck in their own ways other than using force. So at the same time, they're being used by this politician. And at the same time, while all this is happening, there are other type of factions that exist, such as this extremist group right here, which are not people who are shy away from running away from showing who they are to the public and towards the government as well. And they're very radical types, but they're not radical types as in they're going to you can't really arrest them for being protest because all they're doing is protesting right now. And as long as it's peaceful protest, no matter how verbal it is, it's still peaceful protest. However, when the protest becomes something that's violent, then it's a different story. And eventually the story does get to that point with regards to these people. So the next scene goes into the group of people sitting at the table, all of them corrupt in their own way, shape, or form. It's basically everything that you will find in Spirited Away, with the various different type of gluttony, the various different type of irresponsibility, the various different type of gross nature or satiated desires for a better world for their own hands is within this room. All of these politicians, and each one of them wants them. I think maybe just one of them want to balance things off to make the country a better place so that it doesn't fall apart. And maybe one of two of them, while the others are willing to accept what is, and if change needs to happen, it has to be done doing their way or doing it their way in order for things to happen. But based on what's happening within the city right now, the extremists, the terrorist bombings, the gangs and everything, such things are too old-fashioned and needs more aggressive type of reinforcement, but not to a brutal sense. These politicians think that the only way to solve this is to do things brutally or to stick their head in the sand. So, in some ways, while others are trying to use the situation of the chaos to their advantage. So if not most of them, if not all of them, are kind of corrupt in a way, very corrupt, to the point that they start to argue with each other and telling each other like, you know, you're wrong. This is the way it has to be done. No, you're wrong. This is the way it has to be done. Stop living by those old ways. This is the new way. And the other person saying, well, your new way doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. And the whole time while all this is happening, the colonel says, listen, you're too worried about what's going on in society and everything around you. You're forgetting that the boy that interacted with one of the terrorists, the deeds of these terrorists and the actions of what's going on is not for what you're thinking. They're trying to liberate these extremists, and these type of people are trying to liberate something that should not be liberated. The Akira project was kept top secret and enclosed for a specific reason, so another tragedy to the city does not happen. He's trying to explain to them that someone within the government is secretly trying to release Akira, or secretly trying to find out where Akira is so that they could release any type of possible energy from Akira back into the world and create another disaster. Or another disaster similar to Akira can happen if it triggers a type of a resonance frequency that gives the type of energy and power that Akira has. But at this point in the anime, it does not say that there's such a thing as having powers. It's just assumed that Akira is the name for a project. There's no such thing as superpowers or any of that stuff identified at this point. But this is what I would say is what is called the first turning point in the story, or the halfway point in the story. This is the general halfway point in the story. When they show this little room with these gentlemen sitting and discussing the future of Japan and how they could make Japan better, how they could benefit from what's going on, and how they could stop these terrorists and everything that's going on. This is the halfway point in the story. And I know this is the halfway point in the story because Akira, when you get towards the end, you're thinking it's over and the story's over, so there's nothing for you to see anymore. You know, a bad guy take out the good guy survives and defeats the bad guy. You know, this person talks to this person, resolution, and boom, it's over. It's not that at all. The story of Akira does not end when you think it's about to end. It goes on. Not for too long, but it still goes on and doesn't end. And you feel like, wow, so there's still more? That was a perfect ending, but yet it's still ending, and there's still more. So, with that said, moving on to the next scene, all of these politicians are crooked, and they're all trying to get things their own way, especially this guy right here. Um, the next scene we see is Tetsuo powers increasing due to the influence of the kid to a level that's unstable and unnatural. Apparently, the government has been experimenting with people um, in order to develop psychic powers. So, this is the first indication that this is not just a story about an experimental children in order to use them for warfare. This is about experimental children in order to enhance certain children that came with a type of ability that can move objects. And simply what the government did is create, I guess, technology, cyber technology that could enhance such behaviors, as well as um, biotechnology that could enhance by them drinking it, by them infusing it within their flesh or injections, enhance such potential that it could excel to a larger degree. So when I tell people that Akira is not just cyberpunk, it's um, this future punk is it's biopunk. The biopunk is mostly within the science of the world, and the cyberpunk is mostly on the external part of the world. It's not biopunk to an extreme level, as in their clothing is biopunk or their skin is biopunk, or what they're trying to do with regards to agriculture or conservation is biopunk. Is mostly biopunk with regards to um, in relation to the psychic powers and in relation towards the type of technology used to enhance such powers. That's in some ways is biopunk, especially when Tetsuo start to transform. But that's later on in the story. So moving on some more. Um, Eventually, the colonel leaves the little circle ring of political corrupted guys, and then someone sent a military police force, probably an enhanced, not no no, not a military police force. Is more like a CIA type group, a special security bureau type group to arrest the colonel for leaving the meeting and also for probably wanting to start a coup. So not only are these guys corrupt, they want someone to blame for what's going on, the terrorist acts, the possible release of Akira, the gangs, everything, someone to blame and assume that someone is bankrolling all this. So they decide to finger the colonel and point him as responsible for what's going on within the city at the moment. Unfortunately, the colonel says, well, that's impossible. I'm just a military guy. And what they want and what they're assuming I'm responsible for is not happening. You soldiers are simply being used by these crooked politicians trying to just get out of saving the city, and they're just trying to save their hides. So it ends up being a situation where the guy who was sent to arrest him gets shot in the stomach, and his lackey over here, who was about to pull his gun and shoot the colonel, um, as well as the soldiers who were with them in order to reinforce these two lackeys, were being kept and detained by the colonel's own military forces. Eventually, they lower their guns voluntarily because they realize they're just soldiers. They're not into all this politics stuff. They're not into the greed. They're just following orders. And based on what they're seeing and based on what's happening, they tend to agree with the colonel because he's more militaristic with regards to what is, what isn't, and what should be based on how they were trained. So they lower their weapons simply because they understand it from that point of view. I believe they wouldn't have lowered their weapons if they were more like these guys who are more governmental bureaucrat lackeys. So if they were all governmental bureaucrat lackeys, it would have been a showdown, gunfire. but simply because they're military types, they lower their weapons voluntarily. So moving on from that, you then see more lackeys to these politicians, probably special forces group or special security group or section groups, trying to stop the colonel's own private military from getting into the facility and stopping them. And just to point this out, the military is comprised of general private military and general military. So when I say private military, I meant that the military for the general, and I mean for the colonel, isn't private. I think the colonel's own military is a separate division that's private within the overall military of Japan's government, specifically tailored towards taking care of the Akira project. So a bunch of military people from a military base were hired or were sent to do a separate type of job at a certain location and were given authorization by the government to take a certain amount of those groups in order to do such said things. So technically, it's still the general military attacking the government at the same time. And while that is happening, which is a straight on coup, um, it's basically the military itself, the general military itself, saying enough of this bullshit. We're either going to stay with the colonel or we're going to go against the colonel. And majority of them go with the colonel. So it's a military coup that's happening. But from the colonel's point of view, it's not a military coup at all. It's just them taking down corrupt politicians who are trying to finger people and who are trying to um, not realize that the situation that's going on within the city is possibly going to release Akira as well, or somebody is trying to release Akira, but he can't get a hand on who it is. So moving on from that, the colonel, I'm assuming at this point, after they came to this politician's house and his private security can't stop the tank, they've discovered that this guy is the one that's actually was been bankrolling terrorists. So I'm assuming that at this point in the story, it's discovered. Either that or the colonel has sent military tanks to everyone that was within that circle jerk room, um, and to arrest every single one of them and then find out who was the actually mole bankrolling terrorists or causing things to happen the way they happen. Apparently, during at this point in the story, and this should be like the 65% mark of the story, this guy's discovered. One of his men, who was a crooked politician like him, is actually in a bathtub, kills himself in a bathtub, and he himself is trying to escape, but he has heart problems. He has to take his pills. He ends up leaving, running away with most of his treasure fund money or his bankroll money, whatever it is. But everything's all gone to hell. It's crazy. It's his death. He's abandoning ship and getting the hell out before they try him for treason or other things. So moving on from that, we then see our boy Tetsuo has got to the point that he's so powerful, he now thinks of himself as Superman. So he's in the street, explosions are happening in the street. The colonel's military forces are trying to subdue Tetsuo. So there are two things that are going on within the story. The military forces are trying to subdue politicians who have their own private military or private security people, and they're also trying to subdue Tetsuo at the same time, while also trying to keep people from getting close to the firefight while watching out for terrorists who are probably trying to use this opportunity to bypass them and get to certain things and do certain things. So there's at this point in the story, past the halfway point in the story, is where the story starts to get to a ridiculous high crescendo. And moving on from that, you then see the terrorist that the guy was bankrolling. Roy, his name is Roy. He ends up getting shot by his crooked politician, um, believing that Roy betrayed him and sold him out for the reason why the colonel showed up to his door and bust into his place with the tank. Um, he believes Roy did this because Roy showed up, and so Roy gets shot, and Roy end up getting shot and end up collapsing on the street. He laughs it off and say, "This is stupid. You know, all I wanted was to make things better, and I guess in the end, nothing really changed. You know, we end up working for this guy and thinking he will help us to make things better, and nothing really changed. What a joke!" And he dies. So his entire journey seemed to have been that he was simply used, and he didn't realize he was used until the very last moment. I said this before. This is not the type of anime that's for those who are weak-minded when it comes to stories. Not particularly for violence, but simply stories that you're not going to get a good type of ending for some of these characters. Many of these characters in the story are going to have a very bad ending, and some of them are going to have a worse ending, and some of them are going to have a happy ending, and some of them aren't going to have an ending at all. So moving on from that, Roy isn't one of them that had a happy ending. He started off believing that he was going to change things, end up realizing he failed. But did he really? If you really think about it, Akira is far more complicated and than you think. What was really the point of his struggle? Did he really fail? If you have to go back and watch the movie several times, did he really fail, or was he a contributing factor to what was meant to succeed? So moving on from that, we then get to the point in the story, or should I say, when I was watching it, I got to this point in the story. I remember this from years ago, and this is the K part. The name of this person is Kay, and she's someone that Kaneda is fascinated with and kind of has a crush on. I wouldn't say he's in love with her or anything, but he's this chick that he just saw in the place one day. Um, she kind of has the short hair. Maybe he's into short hair chick. Um, she doesn't look like the typical girl, like snotty or rough around the edges. She looks more like someone that's very determined, and she doesn't wear a lot of makeup, so she looks like a natural beauty. And Kaneda found that this type of person wasn't. She wasn't like all over the place. She wasn't looking at herself. She wasn't checking her makeup. She wasn't bullshitting. She looked like she was trying to do something. So when Kaneda first found her in the police station, um, he then discovers that she was with the extremist group or the terrorist group, which don't call themselves extremists or terrorists. They were more like a faction trying to make things right, trying to make the world better. Kaneda said he could make the world better and tells her this. And she said, well, what do little bike punks know about making the world better? So K, here's the thing. K in the story represents virtue, represents hope, represents the other side of the Tetsuo coin, where Tetsuo represents loss, neglect, need, um, a lust for certain things, glutton for certain things, um, hatred and wrath. She is the other side of those things. So this film has two coins, one the good side and one the bad side. And she was specifically put into this film to represent that from since the beginning of the film. What I did not expect was that Kay was going to become like a superhero uh, type of character infused within the story. Because I thought to myself, well, how can this story end being good? Because at this point, the story is already good. So the director excelled it even more, or should I say, the manga artist excelled it even more by making Kay um, a kind of superhero type of character. So moving on from that, and this is the scene where you got their little fight. Kay fought him inside. Now, in the manga, just to be clear, in the manga, the fight is far longer. In the film, it's like 30-second fight most, but in the manga, it's a full-on kind of DBZ type of psychic power fight, and it was very awesome when I first saw it. And to this day, even that 30-second fight, or more like 25-second, even that 25-second or that 30-second fight was more interesting than a lot of movies and films I've seen to date that can't do a proper 25 to 30-second fight. Now, a lot of people don't notice, but 20 to 30 seconds is not as short as you think. It's quite long. If you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, a lot of things can happen within 20 to 30 seconds. And I believe, now think about it, was probably just 20 seconds. So within just 20 seconds of that fight scene between Kei and Tetsuo, a lot of things happened. A lot of scenes were shown, a lot of scene transitions, and a lot of cut scenes happened. A lot of them. Not a ridiculous amount, but just about enough to tell you exactly what this was, what this is, what this moved to, and what happened. Within just the first showing of Kei to the next showing of Tetsuo and other scenes, and then the next showing of the fight between them, and then the next showing of this light excelling from inside the place where that Akira's pod was, or Akira's brain pan, other parts were, to the next scene of her being shot into the air and crash landing like a crater into a ground, and then passing out from the explosion, all done within 20 to 30 seconds. Now that's pretty good. When I saw that, I was like, okay, so not a lot of people can get that right. And so moving on from there, we then see Tetsuo again wearing his like little Superman cape, um, looking over pods, or should I say, looking over the containers, the glass jars that house Akira's parts. So apparently, whenever that nuclear bomb went off way back in 1988, whatever was left of Akira, the government, the corrupted government, decided they were going to dissect the kid and study his parts and his body. This story is not for the weak at heart. It's not like it's bloody and crazy like Game of Thrones level, but the psychological part of the story is kind of messed up. So Tetsuo was looking around and he saw all the different containers and cylinders that hold Akira's various body parts, his eyes, his brain, so on and so forth. And moving on from that, we then see walking up the rubble of the messed up looking football stadium that had the facility hidden under it, or I'm not sure if it was a football stadium or if it was a baseball stadium. I think it was a baseball stadium that housed the Akira. No, it was the Olympics. It was the Olympics. It was an Olympic stadium, and the Akira um, pod and the project that was happening to house Akira with the various different scientists there was underneath that Olympic stadium. So walking on top of the rubbles of that Olympic stadium, we see Canada. And I do want to point out the fact that the reason why Tetsuo will wear the cape that I didn't emphasize is not just a Superman thing. It's also something that the director is trying to tell the audience with regards to um, abuse of power, or when someone who's unstable attains power, what would they do? Um, or someone who believes that they are now in control and can now define their own destiny, what would that person do if they believe they're untouchable? They will probably do the same thing. They will believe that they're a Superman, and they believe that they could define their own destiny. And in some cases, and in many cases, Tetsuo is the Superman of this story. So this movie is literally is more than just what it is. it's a comic book story. It's not just a manga, which is a comic book, but it's hinting at a world of comic book within its own comic book, identifying the natures of good and evil in that comic book world within their comic book. So there are many things that are also happening in the story that has nothing to do with politics, corruption, struggles of man, humanitarianism. There's simply some art things, and there's simply some uh, how would I say, like, um, acceptance and approval of what others have said within their own art expressed in this art. So it's here as well. So that's why I'm saying anyone could make a dissertation of this far more than they can with Spirited Away. So we see Canada here. And another thing to point out, everything in this anime was hand drawn. And you could very much see it here, based on Tetsuo's lining, I mean, based on Kaneda's lining, that this is hand drawn. And you could see that it's hand drawn based on the lines around here. And at this point, his face is staying at this point, but underneath the point of his face, around those curves, are another of his face, and another of his face, and another of his face, and another. They're all layered on top of each other. So when he moves his head to the left and to the right, it would seem that they're seamless because they're all layered on top of each other. So the next flip of the page will just show a movement, because this is Japanese anime, but it's cartooning 101, using old stencils ware of manufacturing watercolor boards or vellum paper. I'm not sure exactly what they did for this one, but I know it was hand drawn, and it was vellum and light paper on light box fasteners and other tools that were very specific to its development. And it was very much an old-fashioned domination type cartoon that they did back in the past. So moving on forward, the whole story of him being Superman is excelled to another level. So the story now excels to an even greater level. It's not just about him representing the cape, it's of him actually doing the Superman thing. So it's not just about physical representation, and not just about story representation, and not just about the story itself being shown in certain representations, and not just about characters representation. Everything that's the story is saying and doing and showing is actually happening as well. So where you would think Tetsuo is simply a representation of a thing by him wearing the cape, he doesn't need to actually fly. But in the end, this anime goes to the whole flying route. He actually does what it is that you would think the representation does. Just like when Canada behaves a certain way, and you think it's just a representation of how he's behaving a certain way, eventually he starts doing act based on that certain way he's behaving. So that's another thing that you could look at it from that point of view. And then we get to deeper into the story, and we found out that this is Akira, the child Akira. And we discovered this within either the head of Tetsuo, due to his powers, or within the era that they were located, due to his powers, or through um, one of the children, them showing Kay and other people within, or generally the audience who are watching the film, who Akira is and how Akira looks. And he very much looks like an Akira. In fact, he kind of looks like a younger version of both Tetsuo and Kaneda combined together as a child. So he looks like both Tetsuo and Kaneda, both sides of two different coins, but are on the same side. I've never really dived deep into what what the Akira whole thing was about. But there's actually people who've dived deep into everything that has to do with Akira, that has to do with Kaneda, that has to do with Tetsuo. This anime can go very deep if you wanted to. So going towards the end, we then see um, Tetsuo disappearing after he turns into a huge blob that almost consumes everyone and everything around him, all the different people. Like he went full on the Thing times 10. The Thing movie made by John Carpenter was at the end of that movie was a gigantic creature. What Tetsuo became was something just like that, but I would say times 100. He became like a kaiju type version of that. It was very crazy and very scary. And in some bizarre ways, it looked like a giant baby, um, to the next level of giant baby, like a city type giant baby. So, but deformed. Yeah, so moving on from that, the story then comes to an end, and the 75% markers passed, the 85% markers passed, the 95% markers passed. We're down to the last 3 minutes or the last 2 minutes of the film, and or no, not even the last 1 minute of the film, where Canada, K, and I forgot his name. I missed his name. I don't remember his name. Rode off into the sunset, but it's not really a sunset. It just right into the city. The messed up city is now destroyed, but it's kind of like them riding off into the sunset. It's a ride. So here's the good ending to the many bad endings that happened in the end. Many people had bad endings. Tetsuo had a bad ending. Roy's soldiers, military people. I believe the general was saved. He didn't die. The doctors died. Lots of people died. Um, Many of Canada's biker gangs. In fact, I think all of them died, except this gentleman over here. But it doesn't state that how they all died, but it's assumed that they're dead. Um, and that's it. And at the end of the film, the only people that you know for certain survived are Kay, Canada, um, Canada's biker friend, and the general. So about three confirmed people survived this film, but there were multiple people that were in this film, like a ridiculous amount of people were filmed, even um, clowns and prostitutes and stuff. But everyone got nuked apparently, or weren't able to escape the blast wave. And the story basically doesn't tell you whether these people are alive and are dead, but it's assumed that if they did not escape, that it's most likely that they're all dead. So it's also assumed that they're actually alive as well, but the story never shows you. So it's assumed that the blast wave probably killed everybody, and those who did survive are not shown. So that was the end of Akira, and that's the end of the story. And for one last thing with regards to this story ended with the showing of the Akira eye, or the showing of Tetsuo eye. And the eye of the Tetsuo is a representation of a star. And Tetsuo not only became a star, but eventually became so powerful that he became the center of the main star of his own galaxy. I guess you could say he eventually started developed planets uh, and rocks and other suns within his galaxy. He eventually became a galaxy. And many people believe that's what Tesla ultimately became. He ultimately became a star, or he ultimately became a galaxy. Um, some people say it's a galaxy because at the end of the story, as the credits are showing, nothing but galaxy are showing. And when the camera zoomed out from the star that is shown, that Tesla turned into, it zoomed out and it went into black with credits, with him as fading into black. And the next thing that was shown directly after were was a galaxy, and then multiple galaxies. So it's assumed that Tetsuo is either a star within a galaxy, or he has become a galaxy itself, which is phenomenally crazy. But this is the direction of the manga artist who created Akira. Now, the next story is, and I'll make this one pretty fast, but I got really into Akira there. And the next story is Nausicaa, of the Valley of the Wind. So, not to beat around the bush on this one, this is very Star Wars like anime. It starts with a snowy climate. The narrator state, it's been 1,000 years since society of mankind fell, and this is 1,000 years into the future. A toxic cloud has threatened humanity's race, and war has brought society to its knees, and people are now deformed, and creatures came into existence. The whole people are deformed and creatures came into existence is kind of like a thing I made up because there's no such thing as these type of birds that exist that walk around and look the way they do, and there's no such thing as giant insects that exist in the world unless you're talking about a future world where mutation happens and giant insects exist. So I just add that in because that just makes sense why giant insects and strange looking type of birds are now being rode like horses. So yeah, um, this is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Now, Miyazaki's first, uh, I think this is one of Miyazaki's first projects, and it's still good to this very day. So, if I didn't state this before, I'll state it right now. The very first film that I saw, which is which actually classified Spirited Away, that's a 5 stars. And Akira, I didn't put down what points I had as Akira, but I wrote here on a piece of paper. Akira was a 4 and 3/4 stars, which is almost a full pie, but it's off by 25%. So Akira is not like 4 and 1/3. It's slightly better than 4 and 1/3, but I can't really say it's a full 5 stars due to its nature and its violence, and not meant for everyone. And it's not that type of anime that's meant for everyone. That's why it's my second favorite. This one is a 4 and 3/4 stars as well, and a little better than 4 and 1/3, because it also hits on many angles, but at the same time, it's a very dystopia future, and it's about survival. It's about a lot of darkness, and it's about hope as well. And that doesn't resonate with a lot of people, and especially it doesn't resonate with children. So you don't really show this to kids. You would show something more like Spirited Away to kids. So moving on from that and back into the story. Um, we then see a guy going through, or should I say, this man who's riding on these creatures goes through a town, watches like snow looking things are going around them. They're not really snow, they're spores, but it looks like snow falling on the town. And the village is pretty much corrupted by this cloud of spores. And the spores come from the poison cloud, I believe, and it's a representation of uh, life cannot exist within this era anymore. So he moved on from there, and the next scene is shown a girl, and this girl is called Princess Nausicaa, and Princess Nausicaa is the main protagonist of the story. And Princess Nausicaa is an explorer. Princess Nausicaa is a badass, and Princess Nausicaa is a heroine as well as um, the chosen one, but it is not stated that she is the chosen one at the beginning or the middle of the story. It's stating all the way towards the end that she is the chosen one. Now, typically, when you do this person's the chosen one towards the end of something, that rubs people the wrong way. Why couldn't you do it earlier at the beginning or in the middle? But for this story, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, it's very specific that she was introduced as the savior towards the end because it was part of a prophecy. And prophecy can not say that this person is the prophet at the beginning or at the middle. And if you sell it at the middle, it has to be sold right. Otherwise, you screw up. It's much easier to sell something as person as a prophet in a film towards the end if it's just a film. It's just a one shot. But if it's like a continuing series or if it's a continuing films as part of an anthology or part of a trilogy, that might not be the case. So here, Nausicaa finds an Ohm shell and other things within this location that was all busted up. And ohms are basically the giant insects of this world. And ohms were said to be one of the reasons why the world came to an end, not the main reasons. And they came into existence over the past 1,000 years simply because of man interference with nature. This is Miyazaki's early works of man interfering with nature itself, and man tampering with nature caused the world to come to an end. That said, she then touches the Ohm shell eye, which the Ohm shell eye can be used as an actual shield, and also the eye itself can also be used to reinforce certain things. Yes, the eye, just the glass eye of the Ohm, the eye itself, is extremely hard and extremely powerful and a great resource in order to fix things within their village or secure things. So if the eye is that powerful, then the shell and everything is ridiculously strong. That's one of the reasons why those creatures, the Ohms, kind of destroy the world as well as the giant warriors. And the giant warriors is something I'll get into later. So she then sees a fellow village person, and his name is Upa, Lord Upa, and she saves him from Ohm, and she returns to her village, and after returning her, but before returning her village, he meets a little creature that Upa had and gave to her, and she names this. I think Upa named the creature Taito, and she kept Taito, and that's that. And moving on from there, after that, she and Lord Upa returned to the village, and I believe Lord Upa is like a Gandalf type. He's respected by everyone in the village, and he's a feared warrior amongst other villages. But he's an old man now. But when he was young, he was like this legendary hero, and is still considered a legendary hero. Moving on from that, um, let's see. The story then emphasized what the giant warriors were and where they came from, and how it was mainly the giant warriors that ended the world due to man's own personal greeds and desire for possessions and certain things. Once again, possessions and desires playing a part within the story, the Miyazaki stories, and yeah, that's something. And moving on from that, we then get to a scene where a country um, or a continent, I believe a country called Torumekia, um, came to the village um, in the Valley of the Wind simply to find their crashed ship. And one of the Torumekian ship crashed some distance away from the village, and they believe that the villagers kept a property of theirs and put it within their village. So they forcefully came into the village and came into the king's bedchamber and trying to force him to tell them where um, the property of theirs was that was on the ship, and he refused to do so. They end up killing him, but the film does not say that he refused to do so. It just shows a scene of them busting in, and then the next scene is showing Nausicaa busting in, seeing them standing over his body. So it's assumed that his father, her father, refused to tell him where it was, or refused to cooperate, and they end up killing him. Um, because the Talmekians are people who do things pretty much by force first, and then, you know, ask questions later type people. That doesn't go good with Nausicaa whatsoever at all, because that's her father. So she ended up getting into a little fist fight, knife fight with them, and gunfight with them, mostly knife fight, or sword fight, or pole fight, however you want to call it. But she ended up killing a lot of them. And I think she ended up killing every single one of them. All the soldiers that were there previously in the scene, um, they all died. Maybe one of them survived, but she killed all of them. So she obviously had training from Lord Upa, and it's assumed that she has training from Lord Upa because she's always uh, seen Lord Upa is seen like a mentor to her, um, but it's never shown in any type of training that she was trained. So it comes across as she's a Mary Sue, but you kind of know that Lord Upa trained her, so it's not really a Mary Sue. It's more like she's a princess and she was trained in order to do those things. Because no way a person could just do a thing. So it was assumed that Upa, Lord Upa, and or the soldiers that are within her kingdom trained her as a princess. So she killed them, and eventually she regressed killing them. But the rage for her dead father is the reason why she killed him. So Upo interrupted the fight, still got skills, and told one of the Talmekian soldier that this main the steel that he's carrying is can cut through his armor like a knife through butter, and he stops the princess at the same time from killing any other additional soldiers of the Talmekians. So yeah, it's at this point I would say Princess Nausicaa is very much like a Luke Skywalker type. So she's very much like Luke Skywalker, but in some ways she's better than Luke Skywalker because she learned fast, and she's around about the same age, but she's more skilled of a fighter. So she was willing, I guess you could say, because she was a princess um, in her castle or in her village, because it just never stated that it's a castle, but she was in a village, and I guess you could say because she was trained over the years, like Luke has more of a forgiveness to him because he wasn't trained for as long as she was. So that said, moving on from the story, um, you then go to the old woman who basically speaks to the Talmekian soldiers, and she wants the villagers to rise up against the Talmekian soldiers for killing the king. Of course, Nausicaa interrupted and say, "Listen, we have to play nice with these people, otherwise all the villagers are going to get massacred. At the moment, they have more manpower and they have more firepower than us. But when our opportunity comes, we'll be able to take back our village." So the old woman agrees, and Nausicaa goes off on her own in order to seek guidance from fellow friends. She eventually comes accidentally falls into or should I say, the the Talme- the Talmekian empress who was with the soldiers upon the invasion of the Valley of the Wind, um, stumbles into this little Ohm nest, and Nausicaa simply just had to be there to rescue her from her own failings. Otherwise, she would be dead by now. Um, moving on from that, and let me see what else. Yeah, moving on from that, eventually the story gets to a point where she meets a boy, and who's a warrior from Pejite, a warring faction or warring nation against the Talmekian nation. So there are two there are two warring nations, and there's one village kind of like caught in crossfire, but not really, because the people of the village of the Valley for the Wind aren't involved in anything externally in the very distant lands. They're far from it, and the poison clouds of the deep forest area separates their village from the rest of society, of the world, or of the cities. So they're able to stay and have their own kingdom in this era, knowing that the fact that no one's stupid enough to go through the poison cloud forest that surrounds their village area near the coast, near the coast and near the oceans of where the valley is. Um, but that's also a bad thing for their village as well, because as time passed, as the years pass, the poison clouds grows in all directions, and it also is growing closer towards their village as well. So the poison clouds, the toxic clouds, is something that has to be taken care of. Once again, conservation is is mentioned within the story, earlier on in the story, and also at this point when talking to this Pejite. Um, also, the story also shows the nature of human beings through the Empress herself, stating that if push comes to shove, she would shove if she needs to, which is most logical if you're pushing someone. But in her sense of push coming to shove, no one is pushing her, but she's assuming the worst, because that's how certain people are raised. They assume the worst, even if there's nothing, no threats around. They will assume that there will be threats that are going to be around, and in all truth, that one should prepare themselves for such threats, but one should not act upon such threats by force. And that's the difference between preparing and having forces to prepare for threats, and then acting upon influence within such forces to ensure that such threats does not happen. Basically, the princess, this empress from Torumekia, or a princess, however you want to call her, is a jump the shark kind of type person, or jump the gun, not really jump the shark, and is willing to indulge in the nature of corruption rather than the nature of seeing if there's a better option. She goes towards the darker side pretty quickly rather than easily. She knows that things can be solved the better way, but she believes that the quicker solution is the easier solution. So she's another representation of what the director is trying to say within the story with regards to human nature. And the type of nature is the reason why the world came to an end. Not just the need for consumption and need for being in charge, but that type of nature which she's expressing is the reason why the world came to an end. So she's a representation of the old world in the times that they're living now. So another way of showing this is that she's in charge of the military tanks. She decides to take charge of the military tanks and says, okay, um, we need to stop these people from revolting against us. And by using force, if we must, we must. And then she's in charge and she's in the head, and it's all in her head. War, however her life was, the damage that was done to her arm was completely gone. Whatever happened to her in the past. It completely screwed up her mind and made her realize that this is the way the world is, and she can't see past this because she was traumatized due to those actions. So that said, she decided to, or should I say, others decide to take actions and kidnap a baby and this baby which is damaged with various different arrows and different poles slashed into its carcass. I wouldn't say carcass because it's not really dead, but into its shell. Um, it's calling out for help, and various different Ohms comes to his aid, raging at the fact that this baby Ohm was kidnapped, and in retaliation to saying that this is the perfect time to test out one of their secrets that they had the whole time, the princess ordered the giant warrior that wasn't finished constructing, that wasn't finished building, to attack the Ohm herd that was coming towards them and their tanks and everything. Um, another another situation with regards to desires to order, desires to control, desires to um, to enforce without paying attention to the logic of what's going on. And so the princess is also a representation, the princess of Torumekia is also a representation of ignorance, um, with regards to what's happening around her at the same time. She's aware that it's happening, but she believes she's fully in control of controlling such things that cannot be controlled. Um, in the end, the all of them end up destroying the Torumekian forces, and the princess of the Torumekians just managed to escape. But in the crossfire between the herd and the busted up a giant warrior that completely collapsed from not being fully functioning and fully able to operate at his full capacity, collapsed on his own. Um, the Talmecan soldiers were at the mercy of the herd, and they got trampled over, and majority, if not most of them, died. The ones that survived managed to get out, and they left. And once again, Miyazaki is not good at endings with regards to resolution to certain people and certain individuals and certain actions. For instance, the Talmekians came into the village, Talmekians left the village as if they did nothing wrong. And the princess just got into her ship and escaped and left, or not escaped, just left and left the village alone and went back to her place. And you don't know if she's going to return back, and you don't know if she's learned her lesson, and you don't know if she's accepted her faith, or you don't know anything, because it's just shown that she left the village, like she gave up on the village and decide to return back home. So you have to assume that this is the director's way of saying she has given up on being stubborn and accepted that the way of the village and the way of Nausicaa's thinking is the better way of doing things. But that's not clarified that that is the case. And that's why I'm saying sometimes Miyazaki, or should I say most times in his story, whether it's at the beginning, the middle, or near the end, um, leaves things unresolved. And it's not an unresolved the thing type of John Carpenter, where McCready and Childs are at the end and cut the credits and it's done. His unresolved are kind of disrespectful to the story in a way, that this woman and her people got away with murdering the king, and the only way to solve the story is to make peace with these people, and no type of punishment was enforced upon them, or no type of forgiveness, or no type of um, uh, reprimand, or no type of making up was given to the people of the village. They just got in their ship and bounced. So yeah, that's that. And that's another reason why this one is in the third slot. Um, there are certain things that you just doesn't make sense. So towards the end, um, yeah, it's then discovered that Nausicaa is the chosen one. So where Granny was thinking, oh my goodness, somebody else, it's this dude, which has this bird on his shoulder and wearing a blue cape and riding in a wind of gold on his back, carrying a shaft in his hand. That's not the case. It was never a man. It was always a girl wearing blue, and the animal was not a bird. It was like a small creature of the same color. But the colors were all the same, but the characters were different. It wasn't a man, it was always a girl. So the person that was to save that their village, or to bring balance to nature, or to understand nature and to help balance through that nature, was Nausicaa. And this is seen by all the Ohms, the tentacle from the Ohms, the light and ray and energy that comes from them, um, propelling Nausicaa into the air. And she was walking like she's walking on water. It's like she's literally walking on water like Jesus or something, but she's walking on air. They are literally, the energy from them is literally holding her up in the air. Multiple Ohms, like all of them. And by this scene, after she's basically assumed to be dead and revived by the Ohms through their golden energy, um, and she's walking on this golden energy, like this river, like this entire sea of nothing but golden rays. It's then shown that she is the chosen one. And towards the end, she doesn't die. She's revived by the power of nature itself. And the chosen one returns to her people. And that's the end of the story of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And what's even greater to the story, and that's why I have this, and I would have put this at my number one if it wasn't for the fact that I don't believe this is meant for everyone. This is like an Akira type of situation. Um, it ends on a great way. The way I like those old school films to end. It's showing, as the credits are going, it's showing animation still happening, and things are still happening, and the story is still progressing even after the credits are rolling. And Nausicaa's held up into the wind, because it's called Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, so they made it look towards the very end like she's riding the wind, and not just like walking on air on the wind, but that at the same time, uh, the boy that she met, the Pejat warrior, hoist her up into the air and made her look like she's a plane, like she's riding the wind. And that's the end of that. And the Ohms, they all return back to their homes, back to where they came from, and there's a sea of them. There's no way any military or any warring faction would have been able to defeat them. They're a sea of Ohms. And Ohms aren't like tanks. Ohms are like titanium tanks. Like if you were to shoot a bomb at them, or a drop of C4 on them, or throw a grenade at any one of them, it will simply explode on the surface of their shell, and it will probably itch them at best. So there was no way anyone was going to survive the Ohms. And the Ohms are a representation of nature itself taking, you know, fighting back. The Ohms is nature's guardian forces, or guardian angels. Nature's like red blood cells. No, nature's white blood cells. That's what they are. They're willing to destroy all those who are going to bring the world into a chaotic state. And so, as the story goes past the credits, and you see even more images are shown as credits are rolling, and you see Upa and the Pejai warrior on the back. I'm assuming it's the Pejai warrior. I didn't look that close to examine. Um, Moving forward, the last scene is the tunnel for which, or the cave for which Nausicaa fell earlier on in the story, that she could have breathed in, and she didn't have to worry about the toxic clouds. An area that was found within a cave. That area in that cave is shown, and that area in that cave that's shown is um, full of oxygen, and a small plant grows there, wearing Nausicaa's helmet, and that's another representation. It's showing that um, she breathed in that area, and fresh air oxygen was in that area, and where fresh air oxygen is in that area, that's where life is going to start to reclaim itself. So yeah, it's another telling of uh, conservation or of nature, of life finding a way. Was towards the very, very last end, past the credits, before the overall general credits cut to black shown. So that's that. And then I think right before that scene was Nausicaa waving to um, Upa and the Pejart warrior. Um, and that's that. And I always assumed that that wave meant um, that was meant for everyone. It was meant for the general audience. And that wave towards Upa and to Pejart warrior, long farewell, was meant for the general audience, because right directly after the credits roll and it showed Upa on his steed, and then it showed the helmet towards the end. So right before that, those credit rolling scenes, the last actual scene before credits were rolling, or during when credits were rolling, um, was Nausicaa waving. So the last image of Nausicaa was her waving, and it's assumed that she was waving to the audience, even though she was wearing to Lord Upa. So moving on to the next one. After that, like I said, I gave Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind 4 3/4 stars, just like I gave to Akira. The next story, it should be also an obvious one. And I'll move on faster in this one than I did the last one as well. And this one is called Ghost in the Shell. This is the third one. Now, this one is a 4 1/3 stars, and it's fantastic, and it's to another level with regards to corruption and abuse and political intrigue. And the difference between this and Nausicaa and this and Akira and this and Spirited Away, this is very, very, very much deep cyberpunk. So this is more cyberpunk than Akira will ever be. In fact, let's go into a cyberpunk to a next level. Like, this is a detective type cyberpunk. So not to get too deep, I'll go straight into the synopsis for this one. In the future of the human evolution, by the use of computer chips and data control, memory implantations, the Society of Gits, which is Ghost in the Shell, has excelled to a state of cyborg and human reality. The powers that allow such things to be are trampled by companies, remnants of successor from the past, and have certain sections within the government in order to rule over society. Governments, and as well as social structures and pharmaceutical enterprises. And then moving on from that, I would say in this anime, such companies and such association aren't directly named in the Ghost in the Shell 1995 film, but it's assumed that such individuals and conglomerates are being identified, even though they're not directly named. I believe the only companies that were directly named were probably just one, other than Section 5 and Section 9, or business that were identified was just one, maybe even two. No, it was just one. And then Section 5 and Section 9 was identified, and then the American government, I believe, was identified as well. So Section 9 is an independent run security bureau or security division, enforcement division under the government. And it's an independent branch and authorized to hunt down any type of threats towards Japan, whether it's corporate espionage or general terrorism or even cyber hacking. Turns out that there is a threat, and of a very large scale one that's going to be popping up in the film, and it's from an outside source. And that's where we are that's where we are right now within the story of Ghost in the Shell. So on top of this building, you see a woman sitting here, and she's about to intercept one of such corruptions. And this character is called Mokoto Kusanagi. And Mokoto has been a fan favorite for years, and she will continue to be a fan favorite for years as long as they're diehard fans. Mokoto will always be there, and so I won't get too deep into that and continue in the story. But I will say she's the major of Section 9. She's in charge of all the troops of Section 9, which aren't a lot. It's like a small little fire team of very smart and very intelligent and very strong individuals. And they have various different skills and various different, they bring certain things to the table, which Mokoto can't do. But at the same time, um, they very much make up. It's like an entire body. Their team make up one. One that fell, the other would have to pick up the slack. One falls, the other pick up the slack, so on and so forth. So I would say the anime is very good with regards to spreading out the responsibility of certain actions rather than leaving it all within just one person. Because in this type of anime, you have to have such responsibilities tailored towards other individuals. You can't just have one or two people doing all this, otherwise it will feel crowded. And also, to make it feel like it's more like a family thing that's going on within Section 9, you tailor the responsibilities to other people to do as well. Is smarter and it's more efficient with regards to the story. Um, yeah, so moving on from that, we go into the next scene. Or should I say one of the very first scenes. You see the first corruption here. It happens. Two gentlemen are speaking. One is trying to sell out. One is trying to bribe a member within a faction within the Japanese government, or so on and so forth. Um, Eventually, Mokoto goes into her stealth mode, finds who this corrupted guy is, takes him out, blows his head clean off. It was very violent, and goes into thermoptic camouflage. Now, thermoptic camouflage is part of the whole predator type thing that's going on, where the use our heat sensors in order to block the body and to not to be identified by anyone due to heat sensors, which is kind of strange for Makoto because she's kind of a robot. So I guess to block off the heat sensors of her component parts, I guess makes more sense, or the radiated parts from her internal organs that aren't really human but are giving off heat. Those need to be blocked off at the same time. So Makoto is basically designed to be a doll-like in form and a doll-like in face. So through the entire anime, you probably won't see her blink that much at all, because that was the intent of her character, for her eyes to be that of a doll that does not blink with regards to friction or regards to wind and so on and so forth. It's intended for her to have that creepy ass look on her in her eyes when doing anything, just to show the type of character that she is and the type of world that we're in. So after that scene, we then showed how she's been constructed at the very beginning, the intro of the film, and then how she excels out of the fluid that's forming her body, her organs on top of the layer of flesh that are forming on top of her bones and on top of the muscles, and then the computer that's actually making sure that white substance is turning into flesh tone colors underneath. And eventually, um, she comes out like a brand new car. Hair, eyes, the whole shebang. It's very weird, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense if you're creating something from a manufacturing point of view. So she's pretty much a manufactured cyborg, or has a manufactured cybernetic body. But her mind, even though it's a cyborg brain as well, her memories within her cyborg brain, which is both organic as well as mechanical, is 100% hers. So who Makoto Kushinagi was is unknown throughout the film. The look of this character, you can only assume that she's somewhat whoever she was look kind of like this character, even though I'm pretty sure she doesn't look like this character at all. But this is the body that she chose to accept for her memories to be implanted into. So the gentleman on the right is her senior, and the person that's in charge of Section 9. And he orders her to check the brain of this cyborg, this android, however you want to call it, that was hacked, and that they found out from the guy that she blew his head off, what was going on, some type of deal within the American government and Japanese government was going on secretly that they did not know of. And her friends, or should I say her associates, Bato and Togasa and the other members, all are part of this to find out what's going on within the story. So Togasa is interesting person. He's the only person that's human within the group. Everybody else is cyborg, and I think this is the director's whole take on if there's one thing in the story that should not be touched and should not be made cyborg, it's Togasa. So Togasa is the representation of anti cybernetic anything, but he doesn't fight against it, or he doesn't resist it. He's not an enemy of it. He's accepted it as part of society, but he's unwilling to accept that that's the way society should go. And no one within Section 9, actually, including the chief, doesn't fight Togasa's belief at all. Or does Mokoto fight Togasa's belief? In fact, I believe Mokoto and the other cyborgs welcome the fact that they don't like that he's a human, but they welcome the fact that he's a person that's willing to stick up to his belief, because that type of belief makes them feel more human, because they're not really human anymore. So I guess you could say he feels kind of like a pet in a way, or like a resonance of what they used to be, and he's a reminder of what they used to be. So they kind of like the fact that he doesn't want to be a full-on cyborg, and just implant his brains or his memories into a full-on cyborg. So they kind of like that. And I guess they see the same thing within their section chief, Aramaki, as well, because he's full-on human as well. So there are certain people who are willing to stay human, and there are certain people who are willing to not stay human. And I believe that's the balancing act within Section 9, is you have to have an even amount of cyborgs and an even amount of human beings. But necessarily, it's more wise that everyone is cyborg, depending on type of warfare and the world that they're in. But yeah, that's the story. So moving on from there, you then go to the next scene where Mokoto kicks this guy after going into her stealth mode, predator style, and find out that he's part of a bigger picture as well as a lot of people that were hacked, and that discovered that this person that did the hacking is associated, or should I say the person that did the hacking is someone called the Puppet Master. And the Puppet Master was one of the main reasons why the Americans were being so sketchy and doing double dealings. So they went in to find out what exactly is the Puppet Master, who he is, where he's from, and soon they discovered that the Puppet Master is not a who, it's more like a what. And this what is a new type of species, I guess you could say. We have excelled past the point of AI. This isn't like the Matrix AI. This is more like the Matrix, the Matrix core, where it's no longer about self-awareness. It's about an entity where an AI is no longer an AI anymore. that the sea of information has forced itself together so much that it cannot tell the difference of itself being a program anymore, of a physical nature. It just is. Whereas a program is simply the software that's doing a thing somewhere, that actually robotics has excelled towards a level of state that it itself is no longer robotic. It is its physical form is entity like. So that said, it's very, very much like the core foundation within the matrix, the heart of the matrix is very much like that. Like it's no longer a machine in certain sense. In many sense, it's more like the heart of the matrix is an entity, and you can't really destroy it. I mean, anymore. I mean, you can, but it's not like it's doing it based on something of a program. It's just developing in its own will without any attachments to a plug or to a wall or to anyone giving it information through a download. It's just realizing things of its own. So that's what the puppet master is. Moving on from that, you see Aramaki speaking to the major and says it's a bigger problem than you think, and they assume that someone is tapping into their wireline, and eventually someone comes into the facility by force and claims the puppet master, body of the puppet master. Big shootout happens, but towards the end, or past the 75% marker into like the 85% marker, the body's claimed, put inside a vehicle, and guarded by tank. Aramaki wants Mokoto to reclaim it, and the members of Section 9 to reclaim the puppet master body. Mokoto says, okay, she'll do it, because no one within Section 9, is worrying too much about whether the body gets destroyed or not. It sucks, but they're not worried, because, it's cybernetic. So they go to do the work. Mokoto, goes back into her camouflage once again, but this time it didn't work, and she decides, okay, so the camo isn't working, so I'm going to use brute force to pull the lid open, and then kill whoever's inside, and then reclaim the puppet master body by myself. Unfortunately, the tank itself is so faceted down so hard. It doesn't matter how strong her body is, she cannot open it, and her arms get ripped completely. She ripped off her own arms. To be honest with you, she ripped off her own arms by force, and by trying to pull open the door by force, and the door won't come open, so her whole arm popped off, and in the end, she fell to the ground, almost get killed, but the tank get destroyed by a tank gun, and the person inside the tank is probably dead as hell. If the tank didn't have someone inside, then the tank itself, which was probably programmed in order to operate by itself, is dead as hell, and that's that. And we see here in the scene Bato standing over Makoto's body, as well as the puppet master's cyborg implanted body. And at the end, the military decides to ignore anything from Section 9 and takes actions into, or should I say, the government decides to take actions by themselves and destroy the puppet master before the puppet master get into the wrong hands. So the higher-ups within the Japanese government, or I'm assuming it's the higher-ups within the Japanese government. If it's not the higher-ups within the Japanese government, it's Section 5. It's been years, but they basically destroyed the body of both Mokoto and the puppet master's body, completely obliterated the area. I'm surprised Bato is still alive, but he goes down. I think he took minor damage, but Makoto's body is completely destroyed. Everything about her, the head, eyes, blood, it's like nothing but vapor when the smoke cleared. But you don't get to see it. All you get to see is the images of his angel, and then a huge explosion happens. So it's assumed that entire area has been destroyed, um, or at least her whatever her brain was is not there anymore, as well as the puppet masters. She's pretty much dead. But as we all know, that the body is simply just a cyborg body, and as long as her mind lives within the internet or within the network of information, it can be downloaded, or her memories can be implanted, if it was saved before, into another body, and that memory was saved into the body of that of a child. Um, it's the closest body that Bato could found, and so this is the body of a small version of Mokoto, the body of Mokoto, in that of a child form. Why this body character has the same hair, um, and the eyes kind of look the same as Mokoto's, just a slightly off. The jaw structure is that of a child, um, as well as the shape of the head is that of a child. So I guess it's the closest thing to how she would look that he could find. That's why the hair looks the same. So that said, Mokoto gets up from her child-looking form body, um, and she walks out the door. And she says the next time they meet each other, they might not know each other, and next time they meet, they should have like a password or something like that. Then she walks out, and she says something like, the she stands over the city before the credits roll, and she says the net is vast and infinite, and you never know. Um, and where no, she says, where does the child go from here? Because the net is vast and infinite, and that's pretty much the end of um, the story with regards to Ghost in the Shell. And moving on from that, I would say the story that I gave it for is 4 1/3 is accurate. That's accurate with regards to that. And the last of the story, with regards to um, May anime of 2023, is a story called Your Name. And Your Name is quite an interesting story, and it's been very interesting for quite some time. Now, I did say I was going to do both an anime and a series, but based on the fact that it's been like 2 hours and stuff, and I'm trying to close in all of these stories all together, and it won't make sense to say a series, my top five series as well, because that would be like probably 4 hours. I'm gonna leave it at the films, my top five films, because it's no way. Um, and plus, I have other things I have to do as well. So with that said, the last of the films, of the top five films of all times, or top five films that's on my list, but I believe four out of those five um, are the top five films of all times. I guess you could switch out Your Name for Suzume, if you want to switch out Your Name for Suzume, or you could switch out Your Name for Kiki's Delivery Service, or you could switch out Your Name for um, I guess you could say, oh shoot, what's the name of that film? Another great film, also about 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember, but the point is, the last of these top five films um, can be replaced if you're uncomfortable with the last of these top five films. The first three are a guaranteed. I know for a fact that these films should be in the top three of anyone's list. And if they don't have it in their top three, simply because they're prejudiced towards a certain type of filmmaking, or they're seeing the lens, or they're seeing the story from the point of view of the director, and not from the point of view from the audience. And if you're only seeing that from the director's point of view rather from the audience, you only see one perspective of life. And when you're in an interview and you're talking to people about your film, or you're talking to people about a film that you're seeing, you're giving your opinion. You're giving your opinion to the general audience from simply one point of view, and which is no good. And I don't believe those type of people should be listened to, whether they're famous or they're nobody, because you don't see the bigger picture in total. You only see what you've learned over the years through one aspect ratio or multiple aspect ratios, but you're in one type of bubble. You're behind a war. I mean, you're behind a wall, but you're still unable to get to the other side of the wall. You have your diner, you have your castle, you have your roads, you have your house, you have your home, you have your office area. Everything that you could access, I mean, everything that's accessible to you is within your area behind that wall. So if you try to go outside of that wall, you won't be able to get outside of that wall because you have everything you need within your comfort zone. But every now and again, those same people are the same one that look outside on the other side of the wall and to see and to say to themselves, what if this is the way it should be or the way it shouldn't be? How would they know if they're not willing to cross over? So that's why it's hard for me to listen to anyone who's not willing to see both sides of the door, or the door swings both ways, or look both ways before you cross, type of thing. So yeah, that said, this is the last film on this list. This is called Your Name. This is the fifth movie of the top five animes on my list. Like I said, Your Name can be replaced depending on what type of film that you would replace Your Name for. But those first three films, or first four films, are definitely a top five film. If they're not considered a top five film, they're definitely in the top 10 of someone's list. But they're in my top five because they're simply not just tailored for one type of people or one type of financial game or for one type of purpose. So Your Name is a film that's very interesting and has a very interesting premise and a very interesting idea that's behind it. We start off with two characters. One character is called Taki, and the other one is called Suzuha. Was it called Suzuha? I'm confusing her with someone else. I'm confusing her with someone else in my. I really am. It's not Suzuha. It's Mizuha. Yeah, I'm confusing Suzuha with Mizuha from a different anime. I mean, it's like having multiple children. You watch so much animes; they're all names kind of bunched together. It's like trying to name off every single child of about 50 children, or trying to figure out which is the name of like 50 children that you have or something like that. It's crazy. So yeah, Mizuha and Taki are the protagonists of the story. There are two. There's Mizuha and there's Taki, and they are both intertwined with this great fate. And this fate is to save their village from ultimate destruction from a comet, and at the same time find each other and be with each other with this destiny. Basically, like destiny of some greater purpose is the reason why they were forged to meet each other. That it wasn't just about them and the relationship. It was about something much larger than them, but they end up getting pulled together with regards to these things that are larger than them. And this thing is a town which was decimated by this comet within this era, where Mizuha's village used to be. Um, Itomori, I think it was called Itomori. And yeah, and moving forward from that, oh, that's Dragon Ball Z. Moving forward from that, I would say the story takes an interesting turn, but at the same time, it has very, very, very strange atmosphere to it, and it sometimes go all over the place with regards to time management and time travel. Um, that said, when at the end of the story, two characters meet. One, both of them are finally able to acknowledge each other's existence, and they both realize that it's not a dream. Before, at the beginning, they're assuming that it was a dream. Before, at the beginning, they're assuming that this isn't not possible, and there's no way that we went through all this hell and all this tragedy, and this couldn't possibly be a dream. But from beginning to middle to end, the journey was rough and smooth, and at the same time, um, interesting. So I'll just say it. I mean, the images won't give it justice, so I'll just say what happens in the story. So Mizuha prepares herself at the beginning um, of the story. She wakes up. She finds that she's having a regular day like every other day. But then Mizuha, the character here, is not Mizuha. Um, she wakes up and she realizes that she is not a she is Taki. And Taki is within Mizuha's body. And Taki was in Mizuha's body for reasons we do not know. But as the story progresses, we then find out that the reasons why that body swap possibly happens is due to a comet falling down. And eventually, this comet that falls down is going to destroy the town. And the period between when the comet is about to fall down to when the comet actually falls down, several events happen. One is Bear's transition between characters swapping bodies. Two is between uh, Taki trying to find a relationship with someone else, but at the same time realizing he actually wants to learn more about Mizuha. Three is within Mizuha trying to come to terms with who she is and the village that she's in, whether she wants to stay, whether she wants to leave, and also to find out who Taki is. And eventually, towards the end, Taki is told by someone within a restaurant that the their village is about to be destroyed, or their village is going to be destroyed. And so Taki takes it upon himself to find out a way to evacuate said village using Mizuha's body. So eventually he does exit the people from the village um, by this fake bomb news using, I guess, a broadcast big phone or broadcast loud phone or loudspeaker that's at a school through one of Mizuha's friends, and the bomb goes off. Evacuation happens. Turns out that evacuation was fake, but at the same time, the comet was coming down, and they managed to avert the disaster of the people dying, or most of them from dying, and most of them end up staying outside. So whenever the comet did hit the town, whoever was outside of the town who managed to get outside of the town were saved, and it was broadcast on the news, and Taki ended up saving the town, but not before finding out who Mizuha was and what Mizuha is like and why he's swapping bodies with Mizuha. And it's discovered through Mizuha's family line that this situation happened in the past. That is something that has to do with where they live within that village and the past of her family bloodline. I guess they were a spirit priest or someone that within their family bloodline and that had some type of powers, and that this uh, event of this comet falling is kind of a prophetic type of thing, but it's more like a aurora borealis type of thing, or a Bermuda Triangle type of thing. So it felt very much like that more than anything. So upon saving the town and evacuating the people from the town, Taki eventually finally meets Mizuha, but then he eventually, it's revealed later in the story, or to a certain point in the story, that before They even meet each other and finally meet each other, and the story comes to a conclusion that Mizuha did go to Tokyo to look for this guy to see if he exists. So the time periods between both these characters happen 3 years apart. So when she did go to meet Taki um, to see who she was in Tokyo, he didn't know who she is because um, the Taki that switched bodies with her was the Taki that she met in Tokyo. It was the Taki 3 years into the future. So this Taki wouldn't know anything until he gets up to that point in the future when the body swap happens. Because that's the direction of this story with regards to body swapping. It's a future time traveling story. It's a future body swapping time traveling story. And it's kind of convoluted at the times, and I could understand the fact that some certain people will be turned off by this and wouldn't have this in their top 5 or their top 10. But how the story was developed is quite interesting. Not many people can make us kind of a body swapping story done well, and at the same time make it kind of a love story, but at the same time make it kind of a disaster story, and at the same time make it a journey at the same time. There were lots of things going on with the story that had to be done. There was a journey that had to be done. There was a love story that had to be done. There was a race against time that had to be done. There was time traveling that had to be done, and there was uh, emotional journey between two characters that had nothing to do with relationship or liking each other that had to be done. Both of them had to excel past their maturities to accept certain things. That had to be done as well. So lots of things happened within this film, and some things could have been tightened up and some things could have been cut off. A majority of those things had to do with multiple time travels. They didn't have to do so much, and that's the turnoff. But if you take away the multiple time travels out of the show, there's not much you could say that's bad about the show. I think if they would cut back at least five to six time travel sequence of this happening here and this happening here and then back and forth. If they cut away from 5 or 6 of those things, the film would have been a perfect film. Because certain love stories, it doesn't need to emphasize "I love you," yes, I know, or "I love you," and then they make love in certain things, and then the story ends, or they have to kiss each other, or they have to kiss each other, or they have to make love to each other for them to actually be in love. Or none of that stuff has to happen for it to actually be that type of love story. This is that different type of love story. So that said, that was the fifth of the movies within my list. Now the last of these movies isn't the last of these movies, the fifth movie isn't as I didn't put as much emphasis within the cutscenes and images with regards to these, and might have got like that whole um, Goku thing in there with Radix. I don't know how that popped in there, but I didn't have a lot of cutscenes for this one because it wasn't my true favorite, but at the same time, I appreciate it for what it was. And at the same time, I understand what it was going. I knew that there was a guy that woke up within a bed, and I knew a said guy eventually swapped bodies, and eventually the bodies that he swapped, he would be able to do certain things and get away with certain things. And it became mischievous type of things and playful type of things. I knew these things was going to happen in the film before it happened in the film. What I didn't know is the type of they put a lot of emphasis into some of Mizuha's friends, but not so much that it became bad. More like a lot of emphasis regards to them actually feeling like they're real people rather than them actually needing to have a story for them. They felt like they were real people. They felt like they serve a purpose. They both felt like Mizuha and her friends felt like they didn't actually belong in the village as well. So Mizuha was a representation of, and Mizuha's friends were a representation of how Mizuha feel towards her village as well. So by her friends being like-minded to Mizuha made it more easy than her friends being completely different from Mizuha, simply there to be cannon fodder or to egg on Mizuha simply as representative to make her feel like she has more flesh areas, or to flesh her out more, when in actual doing something like that would take it away. So in here it makes more sense because they're more like-minded towards Mizuha, even though they're very different from Mizuha. They're willing to accept what she's doing, why she's doing it, now how she's doing it, because there are certain things that they align with her with regards to her beliefs or regards to her actions. They understand the struggles of having parents who are bossy and this type of stuff. So that said, I would say this is my take, and those were my top 5 anime of 2023, which are retro takebacks, with exception to Your Name, which is not really retro, is more current. So Your Name is about the only one that's not a retro one. All the others are from the past, anywhere from 20, 30, or even 5 years ago. Not 5 years ago, but more than 10 years ago. All these stories are 10 plus years ago. So that was my retro one. I guess you could say something is retro when it's 20 or plus years. Well, I believe once it goes past the 10-year marker, you can pretty much label it as retro as well. So Your Name is about the only thing that's not retro within this list. Or I hate using the word retro, more like Your Name is the only thing that's not classic, because I know Your Name is going to be anime classic going forward, and I know Your Name was given, I gave Your Name 4 stars, so it's not as high up on the pedestal as the others, but it's still a 4-star story, and it still deserves to be commended for what it is. You know, Mizuha is a very interesting person. Um, she longs to be uh, more than what she is. She longs to look for someone in hopes of finding someone. And in the end, she ended up meeting that someone in Tokyo, of all places. And then they managed to meet up with each other, to recognize each other when they're far older and when they have jobs and so on and so forth. And they're able to do what they're able to do in their jobs. And that's that. Now for the pros and cons, I would say um, pros and cons for these are something I would leave for another day. I think to be honest with you, the pros of every single one of these can be summed up with regards to they all are contributing factors towards something that you will learn from education wise. But if I was to do individual pros and individual cons, I would say, based on what I have written down, okay, so the pros of blah 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 blah. Okay, so what actually you see now I'm having a lot of noise in my background, so I'm gonna leave the pros and cons out. I would actually I would say the pros and cons are pretty much what they are, self-evident within when you watch the film and self-evident within when you watch this video and hear what I'm saying with regards to this video. So based on what I'm saying, I guess you could decide which is pros and which is cons. I'm hearing a lot of static in the back and hearing a lot of voices in the back. So I don't want any background noise to get into this video. So I'm just going to put this here. And I guess you can make the pros and cons for those things for yourself. But rather than having the voice of other people show up in my video, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that where it is. Those are my top 5. And that's it for the end of this list. And I'll call it a day on this and upload this when I can.